In 1995, Michael Thompson was a 32-year-old single plumber in Detroit, Michigan, when he walked into an orphanage to fix an emergency heating system. What he saw changed him forever. Three African-American sisters aged 2, 3, and 4, huddled in a corner, eyes filled with fear and hope. No one wanted to adopt them together. Families were looking for single children, easier to manage. Social workers had already started discussing whether to separate them. Michael, a white man with no parenting experience, no wife, and a modest income, did something everyone told him was impossible. He adopted all three. Neighbors thought he was crazy. Friends turned their backs. His family warned him he was ruining his life. But Michael didn't listen to anyone. And 30 years later, when the three sisters, now successful women, organized a surprise for his 62nd birthday, what they did in front of hundreds of people made him cry like he never had in his life. Because what they had prepared wasn't just a gift. It was living proof that love has no color, that family is built with the heart, and that sometimes one man can change the destiny of three lives. Detroit, Michigan, November 1995. The city was going through one of its darkest periods. The auto industry was in crisis, unemployment was rising, and once prosperous neighborhoods were emptying out. But Michael Thompson wasn't the type to give up. At 32, he ran a small plumbing business he'd inherited from his father. He worked 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, slowly building a reputation for reliability and honesty. Michael was a simple man, tall, sturdy, with calloused hands and a kind smile. He'd never married, not for lack of opportunity, but because he'd always been too busy with work. He lived in a modest house in Dearborn, a Detroit suburb, on a quiet street where everyone knew each other. That Tuesday morning in November, he received an emergency call from Hopewell Children's Home, an orphanage in downtown Detroit. The heating system had collapsed, and with winter approaching, the children were freezing. Michael immediately left the job he was doing and headed to the orphanage. The building was an old 4-story Victorian mansion, once elegant but now dilapidated. Paint peeled from the exterior walls, windows were old and poorly insulated. Michael entered with his toolbox, greeted by Mrs. Patterson, the director, a woman in her 60s with tired but kind eyes. As Mrs. Patterson led him to the basement where the boiler was located, they crossed the main playroom, and that's when Michael saw them for the first time. 3 African-American girls, small, sitting close together on an old couch away from the other children. The oldest, who looked about 4, held the 2 smaller ones tight, with a protective expression far beyond her years. Something about that scene struck Michael straight in the heart. Maybe it was the way the 3 sisters clung to each other. Maybe it was their big eyes that followed him as he passed. Or maybe it was simply destiny. Michael fixed the heating in 3 hours. When he finished, dirty with grease and sweat, he went upstairs to wash his hands. Mrs. Patterson invited him to her office for coffee, a kind way to thank him for coming so quickly. That's when Michael asked about the 3 little girls. Mrs. Patterson sighed deeply. Their names were Maya, Grace, and Hope, 4, 3, and 2 years old. They'd been brought to the orphanage 6 months earlier when their parents died in a car accident. They had no other relatives willing to take them. And the problem was that no one wanted to adopt 3 girls together. Social workers had received several requests to adopt one of the girls individually, especially the youngest, Hope, who was particularly adorable. But the orphanage rules tried to keep siblings together when possible. And Maya, the oldest, categorically refused to be separated from her sisters. She cried, screamed, clung to them with such desperation, it broke your heart. Mrs. Patterson said they would soon be forced to separate them. 3 separate adoptions were better than no adoption. The girls were growing up in the orphanage, a place that did its best, but could never replace a real family. Michael listened in silence, something growing inside him. A crazy, impossible, completely irrational idea. But the more he tried to shake it off, the more it took root in his mind. That evening, back home, Michael couldn't stop thinking about those 3 little girls. He saw them in his dreams, heard their little voices in his head. He woke up at 3 in the morning, sitting on the edge of his bed, and for the first time in his life, he felt with absolute certainty what he had to do. The next day, he returned to the orphanage. Mrs. Patterson was surprised to see him. Michael, with a firm but nervous voice, said he wanted to start the process to adopt the 3 girls. All 3 of them. There was a long silence. Mrs. Patterson looked at him as if he'd said something in a foreign language. Then, gently but firmly, she began listing all the reasons why it was impossible. Michael was single, a man alone. He had no experience with children. His job required long hours. He didn't have a wife to help. And then there was the question of race. In 1995, interracial adoptions were still viewed with suspicion and difficulty by many. But Michael had done his calculations. He had savings. He could reduce his work hours, hire an assistant. His house had 3 bedrooms. He could do it. He had to do it. Mrs. Patterson saw something in Michael's eyes that made her pause. She saw determination, yes, but also something deeper. She saw a man who had heard a calling he couldn't ignore. With a sigh and a tired smile, she said she would start the paperwork. But she warned him. The system was complicated, bureaucratic, and it wouldn't be easy. In the following months, Michael faced a maze of documentation, home visits, psychological evaluations, adoptive parent courses. Social workers were skeptical. A single man wanting to adopt 3 girls, and of a different race. The checks were rigorous, invasive, almost punitive. But Michael persisted. He renovated the house, transforming the basement into a 4th bedroom for himself, freeing the 3 upstairs bedrooms for the girls. He painted the walls with bright colors, bought beds, toys, clothes. He talked to neighbors, teachers, church pastors, building a support network. And during all this time, he visited the girls every week at the orphanage. At first, they were shy, scared, but slowly, week after week, they began to open up. Maya, the oldest, was the most protective and wary. Grace was the most curious and chatty. Hope, the youngest, was simply happy to receive attention. Michael brought them small gifts, picture books, dolls, candy. He read them stories, played hide-and-seek in the orphanage corridors, and slowly, very slowly, he saw something beautiful happen. The girls began to call him Mr. Mike with affection, then simply Mike, and finally, one day Michael never forgot, little Hope called him Daddy. Michael's heart melted. In that moment, any remaining doubt vanished. These were his daughters. DNA didn't matter. Love was all that counted. Final approval came in the summer of 1996, after 9 months of exhausting bureaucracy. Michael received the call from Mrs. Patterson on a Wednesday afternoon. It was official. He could take the girls home. The following Saturday, Michael arrived at the orphanage with his old Ford van, which he'd cleaned and decorated with colorful balloons. The girls were ready, their few belongings packed in 3 small cardboard suitcases. Maya held tight to a worn teddy bear. Grace had a picture book. Hope had only her thumb in her mouth and wide eyes. Mrs. Patterson cried as she helped them climb into the van. She'd worked in that orphanage for 27 years and had seen many adoptions. But this one was special. This man wasn't looking for the perfect child. He was trying to give a family to girls the system was about to divide. The journey home was filled with nervous silence. The girls looked out the window, probably wondering where this kind stranger was taking them. Michael tried to appear calm, but his hands trembled on the steering wheel. Was he really ready for this? 3 little girls? Alone? But when they arrived home and the girls saw their new rooms, each painted a different color, filled with new toys and soft beds, their faces lit up. For the first time in months, he saw them really smile. The first months were chaotic. Michael quickly learned that taking care of 3 little girls was infinitely harder than fixing any pipe. There were diapers to change, Hope wasn't fully trained yet, meals to prepare, about which he knew little, clothes to wash, endless mountains, and especially nightmares to comfort. The girls had deep trauma from losing their parents and their time in the orphanage. Maya had recurring nightmares and woke up screaming. Grace had developed the habit of hiding food under her bed, fearing she wouldn't eat the next day. Hope refused to sleep alone and cried if Michael moved away even for 5 minutes. Michael hired a part-time assistant, an elderly woman named Dorothy who lived down the street. She helped during the day while Michael worked, but the nights were his alone, and they were the hardest. He spent hours sitting on the floor between the 3 bedrooms, singing lullabies he made up, telling stories of brave princesses and gentle dragons. But slowly, week after week, things improved. Nightmares became less frequent. Grace stopped hiding food when she understood Michael always prepared 3 meals a day plus snacks. Hope began sleeping alone, knowing Michael was just across the hall. The community, however, wasn't as welcoming. Neighbors looked at him with suspicion. A white man with 3 black girls? Rumors circulated. Some accused him of having hidden motives. Others simply didn't understand why he'd done it. Michael faced subtle but persistent discrimination. Some mothers at the playground pulled their children away when his daughters tried to play. When he went to the supermarket with the girls, he received looks ranging from curiosity to disgust. One day, a woman openly asked him if he'd kidnapped them. But Michael ignored all this. He had only one priority: give these girls the childhood they deserved. He enrolled them in preschool, took them to church every Sunday, organized elaborate birthday parties. He learned to braid hair by watching VHS tapes from the library. He learned to cook foods they liked. He became expert in everything from applying Band-Aids to scraped knees to negotiating peace during inevitable sister fights. And something magical happened. Slowly but surely, those 3 traumatized girls began to flourish. Maya, the oldest, began to relax, to laugh more often, to act like the 6-year-old she was instead of a substitute mother. Grace discovered her love for books and spent hours having Michael read her stories. Hope, the youngest, became a lively and noisy child who filled the house with laughter. Michael documented everything with an old camera. Photos of first days of school, birthdays, Christmases. He created album after album, wanting the girls to have a record of their childhood, of the family they'd built together. Years passed. Difficulties never completely disappeared. There were always financial challenges, moments of doubt, episodes of racism they had to face. But Michael's house was full of love, laughter.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
And a sense of belonging those girls had never known before. The teenage years brought new challenges. Michael found himself navigating unknown territory, asking for help from Dorothy and his sister Karen, who became essential mother figures. But the biggest challenge came from society. The girls faced constant questions. Why do you have a white dad? Were you kidnapped? Maya, now 14, developed anger toward these questions. One day she came home suspended from school for hitting a boy who'd said Michael couldn't be her real father. Michael sat with her that evening and talked about what family meant. Not DNA or skin color, but love, sacrifice, choice. Grace became the peacemaker, excelled in studies, dreaming of becoming a doctor. Hope was the most emotionally open, but asked questions about the biological parents she didn't remember. Michael was always honest. He had photos and documents from the orphanage. He explained their biological parents had loved them but died tragically. When Maya turned 16, she asked to visit their grave. It was emotional, but leaving the cemetery, Maya hugged Michael and whispered, "Thank you for being our dad." High school brought other challenges. Michael had expanded the business, giving him more time to support Maya in volleyball, Grace in science projects, hope in learning to drive. When it came time for college, Michael had saved enough to help. The girls received scholarships. Maya for sports, Grace for academic excellence, Hope for community service. The idea of seeing them leave terrified Michael, but he knew he had to let them fly. Taking Maya to the University of Michigan was one of the hardest days. Then Grace to Northwestern for medicine, and Hope to Wayne State. Michael found himself alone in the house that had been full of life for 20 years. The silence was deafening, but the girls never really left him alone. Maya called 3 times a week. Grace sent long emails. Hope came home every weekend, and when they returned for holidays, the house filled with life again. Michael traveled to see them. Maya's volleyball games, Grace's labs, monthly dinners with Hope. Years passed quickly. Maya graduated and became a coach. Grace was accepted to medical school at Johns Hopkins. Hope graduated in social work. When Maya got married at 26, Michael walked her down the aisle crying. Grace followed 2 years later. Hope chose to stay single, focused on her career. Grandchildren arrived. Maya had 2, Grace 3. Michael became Grandpa Mike, but he was aging. At 60, the body that had served as a plumber began to fail. The girls insisted he retire. At 61, he finally gave in and sold the business. Retirement was difficult. Too much time, too many thoughts. Hope noticed he was struggling and began involving him in her work. Maya and Grace did the same. And then came his 62nd birthday. The girls said they wanted a small party. Nothing special. Michael agreed, expecting a quiet dinner. He had no idea what awaited him. When Michael stepped into Maya's backyard, he stopped dead. Dozens of people. Dorothy, Mrs. Patterson, now 90. Former classmates, colleagues, even his sister Karen from Florida. A stage with microphone, banners saying, "Thank you, Dad Michael." Tables full of photos covering 27 years. Maya guided him to a chair in the center. Grace took the stage and told how they'd been on the verge of separation, how Michael had changed their lives. She described the sacrifices, sleepless nights, racism faced, unconditional love. Hope spoke of how Michael never made them feel like a burden. Maya talked about the anger she'd felt for years and how Michael never stopped loving her. She said when she had her own children, she understood the magnitude of what he'd done. The 3 sisters presented 3 frames. Maya, her Teacher of the Year certificate. Grace, her medical degree. Hope, photos of dozens of children she'd helped, each frame with touching dedications. Then they projected a video. Mrs. Patterson spoke of how in 35 years she'd never seen such sacrifice. Testimonials from clients, neighbors, teachers. The grandchildren talked about Grandpa Mike. The 3 sisters said to the camera, "You gave us a family when the world wanted to divide us." The yard was silent, except for tears. Michael cried without shame. Maya announced the final gift. They'd founded the Michael Thompson Foundation to support single men wanting to adopt. $50,000 raised. They already had the first candidate Michael would mentor. Michael stood, voice broken. "You've given me more than I ever gave you. I'm the lucky one." The 3 sisters ran to hug him. That family, built not from blood but from love, was complete. 5 years after that memorable party, Michael Thompson was 67. Arthritis had worsened. He walked with a cane, but his spirit was strong as ever. The Michael Thompson Foundation had flourished beyond all expectations, helping 42 single men adopt 87 children in 5 years. Michael had personally mentored 16 of these men, sharing lessons learned in decades of parenting. The foundation organized monthly support events where single adoptive fathers could share their challenges and successes. Hope ran the foundation full-time, having left her previous job to dedicate herself completely to the mission. Maya had become principal of the high school where she'd started as a coach. She was known for her open-door policy with students, especially those in foster care. She'd created a mentorship program matching foster students with community members, replicating the support model that had saved her and her sisters. Grace was now a respected pediatrician who ran a free clinic for disadvantaged children twice a week. She always said she was paying back the blessings she'd received. Her 3 children were growing up aware of the importance of helping others. Hope, besides running the foundation, had written a book about her experience being adopted with her sisters by a single man. Chosen: How One Man Changed 3 Lives had become a surprising bestseller, inspiring national discussions about adoption, race, and what it meant to be a family. One spring afternoon, Michael sat in his backyard, watching the grandchildren play. There were now 7. Maya had a 3rd child, Grace, still her 3, and Hope had recently adopted a child as a single mother, following in the footsteps of the father who'd inspired her. Watching those children laugh and play, Michael reflected on the incredible journey he'd made. From that day in 1995, when he'd walked into an orphanage to fix a heating system and left with 3 daughters, his life had been a series of small and large miracles. People often stopped him on the street now, thanks to publicity from Hope's book and the foundation. They told him he was a hero, that he'd done something extraordinary. But Michael had never felt like a hero. He'd just felt like a father doing his best. He'd received awards: Father of the Year from the city of Detroit, recognition from the National Adoption Association, even an invitation to the White House for an adoption event. But none of these meant as much as the simple words, "I love you, Dad," that his daughters still told him regularly. One evening, the whole family gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition they'd maintained for years. Maya's house was full of noise and chaos. As the 7 grandchildren ran around, adults tried to have conversations above the din, and food passed from hand to hand. At one point, Maya raised her glass for a toast. She said she wanted to celebrate something special. After years of work, the city of Detroit had just approved a new pilot program to support sibling group adoptions, modeled on the Michael Thompson Foundation. It would be government-funded and could help hundreds of children in coming years. The room exploded in applause. Michael sat there, surrounded by the family he'd created, the community they'd built, the impact they'd had, and he felt complete. Hope came up to him after dinner, when the others were busy with the children. She sat beside him in silence for a moment, then said something Michael would carry with him forever. She said she'd spent years wondering why her biological parents had died, why she and her sisters had to go through that trauma. But now, seeing all the lives that had been touched by their story, seeing the children who'd been helped by the foundation, seeing the impact they'd had, she thought she understood. Sometimes tragedies don't have simple explanations, but sometimes, from those tragedies, something beautiful emerges. She and her sisters had lost their first parents, but they'd gained Michael, and through Michael, they'd learned lessons they could now pass on to others. Michael hugged her, this miracle of a woman who'd been a terrified 2-year-old when he first met her. He told her he was proud not just of what she'd become, but of who she'd always been: a fighter, a survivor, a bearer of light. That night, when everyone had gone and Michael returned to his empty but memory-filled house, he sat in his living room. The walls were covered with photos, decades of captured moments, first days of school, graduations, weddings, grandchildren's births, an entire life documented in frames. His gaze stopped on one particular photo. It was from his first week with the girls in 1996. The 3 little girls sat on his couch, still shy, still unsure, but with the first hints of smiles on their faces. Michael was behind them, young and nervous, Maya's hand in his. That man in the photo didn't know what awaited him. He didn't know about the sleepless nights, the fears, the challenges, but he also didn't know about the indescribable joy, the deep love, the sense of purpose those 3 little girls would bring to his life. If he could go back and talk to that nervous young Michael, what would he say? Probably just this: "You're ready for the most difficult and most rewarding journey of your life, and it will be worth it." every single second. Michael turned off the lights and went to bed. Tomorrow, he'd have to mentor a new adoptive father struggling with adopting 2 siblings. Next week, Hope had organized a foundation event where he'd have to speak. Next month was Grace's birthday, and she'd insisted on a big party. Life continued. Children grew. Grandchildren got older. The foundation's work expanded. And Michael, despite his age and aches, was still at the center of it all. Still giving, still loving, still making a difference. Because that's what he'd learned in nearly 3 decades of being a father. True love has no limits. It's not limited by blood or race or circumstances. It's a choice you make every day, the choice to show up, to give, to sacrifice, to love unconditionally. And that choice he'd made in 1995 to adopt 3 girls no one else wanted hadn't just changed their lives. It had changed his. It had changed his grandchildren. It had changed the dozens of families helped by the foundation. It had changed an entire community. 1 man, 3 little girls, an act of unconditional love, and a legacy that would continue for generations. Like, if you believe love builds families more than DNA, comment if you've been inspired by someone who chose love beyond conventions. Share this story of sacrifice, love, and transformation. Subscribe for more stories, proving an open heart can change the world. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. And sometimes 1 man alone, with a big enough heart, can change not just 3 lives, but the entire world, 1 choice of love at a time.